evening, everyone. My name is Angel Degowski, and I was 23 when I finally received the diagnosis of ADD and being on the spectrum, high functional Asperger's. During my time as an adolescent, I was experimented on with various medications to treat bipolar disorder. Because when they do diagnosis on adolescents, they often tend to give suggestive questions. So instead of saying, how do you sleep? They say, do you find that you have nights where you don't sleep? Well, what teenager doesn't sleep about video games? And this led to a series of erratic behavior because of medication mismanagement that, while not completely, did heavy damage to my ability to be effective as an adult. I largely place the responsibility of that on these ideas in America of having too big to fail corporations and institutions. The fact that only 15 corporate persons were responsible for every single New Mexican's mental health is ludicrous. So part of the solution needs to be community-based and networking-based.
Okay.
Building smaller firms so that one or two firms needing to close its doors for whatever reason isn't going to cause 3,000 people to wonder what the heck they're going to do.
Angel, can I interject for a sec? Because we're running short on time.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the co-op that you're trying to set up? Because that's very essential, and then we could just move on, and then you can answer the question that you had in the audience, and we can finish off there. So thank you.
So towards this end, I am setting up a co-op, and I invite everyone, especially providers, in here to join that and put down your availability, put down what insurance you take, and then we can connect and coordinate and do outreach. It's going to take a community to solve this problem. We can't look up to the great beard in the corporate sky to solve this for us. We have to come together and take the steps to do it. And I can get you more information on that after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to give a time check. It's 7:13, just so you all know. Try to leave on time.
I'm Lynn Sanchez with the LifeLink, and I started an outreach advocacy cafe called Sojourners. I'm also part of the LifeLink. I'm a licensed therapist, and I'm the program director for our anti-human trafficking initiative, and we just got a Department of Justice grant finally. We've applied several times. Team Builders was supposed to be our partner for children's services. When we originally applied, we didn't get that grant, went to bigger communities or more populated communities as states rather. But so now we had Agave listed as our partner for children, for child victims of trafficking, and of course Agave is leaving. So I believe that mental health is a critical piece of human trafficking. Homelessness, drug addictions, all of that. I'm tired of seeing young people die. I've had a lot of young women. I've had a couple who committed suicide that I tried to work with and tried to connect with services that don't exist. When we get somebody who's addicted to heroin, people always say, well, tell them to go to detox or tell them to go into a treatment center. There aren't enough treatment centers to serve them. And they're dying right in front of us. And we are worth more than that. Our people are worth more than that. We have so many and just because somebody has a mental illness doesn't mean they're a throwaway person. We have I really believe there's a type of mentality way at the top where this is a throwaway population. Don't worry about them because and nobody's going to speak up for them. We are here to speak up for everybody, for all of our brothers and our sisters and our cousins and our aunts and the people we don't even know, but we see them sleeping on the concrete, or the older lady that we see trying to find a safe ditch to sleep in for the night. I mean, our city is a wealthy, caring city, and yet we have so many homeless people here. We have so much untreated and uncared about mental illness and drug addictions and things like that. It's just in the poverty level. I mean, there's trauma involved with poverty. There's trauma in homelessness. We don't have affordable housing. We don't, and if you think of somebody who's working maybe minimum wage even, for them to access some type of dignified housing is really difficult. For somebody with mental illness or substance abuse or just total disconnection, disenfranchisement from the community, they're not going to be able to navigate the system at all. And these are the things that we need to be thinking about. And I personally am enraged at what's happened with the mental health shakeup, because it's just like Roger said, it's about the people. It's about, so they call it the client, but it's about the people that we're all here to serve. And also each other. I mean, because I have people in my family. I had a young girl who committed suicide, and she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, couldn't get the services that she needed. We couldn't get access through St. Vincent's Hospital here. I mean, it's a real big problem, and it's going to take people who care and people who unite and raise their voice, so we let them know at the top that everybody matters. Everybody matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Cliff, before you start, so I wanted to give you a chance to answer there, and then I wanted to throw out one last question, and you can answer it as well, but then we can maybe shoot it. So here it is. Has it been disclosed or not if the governor or any of her political action committees received contributions from any of the Arizona providers or their owners?
Yes.
So let's go, Cliff, go ahead and answer, and then we'll finish up with that.
So there's two questions, but I wanted to introduce myself first so you know where I'm coming from. As I heard the question from the audience, it was what can we do, which is a great question. Now, what can we do? And then there was a question about what I believe is part of Senator Ortiz-Pino's theory about why we're here in the first place, the political aspect of it. Let me introduce myself. My name is Cliff Reese. I live here in Santa Fe. I'm a retired state government attorney. I spent 23 of my 25 years in state government as an attorney for the Health and Environment Department, which became the Department of Health in 1991. 22 of those 23 years at the Health Department, I was the attorney for the Behavioral Health Services Division, which oversaw on behalf of the state funds and the federal funds that, it wasn't Medicaid in those days, it was block grant federal monies that came in with Reagan in the early 80s, and then the state general fund that the legislature has appropriated for a long time. At least when I started tracking it was in the 1970s. Senator may be able to correct me. It wasn't in the Senate then, but the legislature has been appropriating state general funds. So I retired in 2005, and I've also worked for the state Senate for the last 11 years, including 9 years for the Senate Public Affairs Committee, which Senator Ortiz-Pino now chairs, and has taken the lead during the session on this issue. And I wanted to mention some of the Senate champions. In addition to Senator Ortiz-Pino, has done a great job. Another question they want to ask is, why hasn't the legislature been able to do more? And we can have a frank discussion about the powers and the limits on those powers that the legislature has. But let me tell you, number one, this is not a new issue in terms of conflict between the state and mental health providers. During my 22 years, I jotted a little list down from the memory bank. There were at least 5 fairly controversial terminations of single programs that the health department did. From San Juan County, Carlsbad, Torrance County, which resulted in the New Mexico Supreme Court decision after 10 years of litigation, and right here in Santa Fe, if you remember Sangre de Cristo Community Mental Health, where I worked with, I was a young attorney, it was the early 1980s, and I worked with another young attorney named Tom Udall, who you may forget was the general counsel at the then Health and Environment Department during the early years of the United administration. So we have a history of this. But never in the 23 years I was at the health department did anyone even mention the idea that we would terminate every single contractor at the same time for any of the types of fairly minor violations of our contracts that Patsy described. There was always the opportunity to do a corrective action plan, and if the contract violations were so egregious, then we had a transition plan. And we didn't go to Arizona, we didn't terminate the entire system. We would put out a request for proposal for new contractors from New Mexico, or existing contractors could step up and ask to provide services in those areas, and we would amend their contract if they were an existing contractor. So this is very new and radical, and we can ask why. One of the things I want to mention is that things changed dramatically. First, in 2007, the Payroll Services Division was moved to the Human Services Department. Now, I've never worked for the Human Services Department, and I'm here, by the way, as a private citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Senate, or I'm actually right now in retirement mode, but I'm actively involved in a variety of issues. When Medicaid became one of the driving forces to finance the behavioral health system, which was needed, granted, because the general fund was dropping, and it was an available system. It changed the rules of the game from applying the state's laws and regulations to applying the federal laws and regulations. And frankly, this started under the Richardson administration. I mean, this is not necessarily political, but I would say, in my opinion, that the Martinez administration took advantage of the new rules of the game to meet a political aim, which Senator TZP and I had talked about before I got here. And I apologize for being late. I was in another meeting that didn't be part of the solution. So, we're now under basically federal law in terms of the behavioral health services system. And I won't go through all of the different changes that took place, but the legislature has a role. And the legislature has been active in investigating this. They don't have subpoena powers, they don't have investigators. They have the Legislative Finance Committee staff, but they work for the director, not for Senator Ortiz-Espino. I suspect if he was directing staff, we would have some of the answers that he has raised. But they don't have subpoena power. It's very weak, frankly, in terms of the oversight authority, and I would suggest that's by design, because the executive branch, which makes the rules here, doesn't want oversight, especially from people who know the rules of the game, as the people who are here on stage and you in the audience know. So, there's a variety of things that can be done. Oh, let me make this point. Why is it important not to forget this issue, not just because of the politics and the administration, but because of the human toll that has been so accurately and vividly and touchingly portrayed here tonight. And this story is repeated around the state, as Senator Ortiz-Espino knows, because as chair of the Interim Legislative Health and Service Committee, he has held hearings around the state and heard from consumers. It's not just here in Santa Fe. Why is it important? Well, guess what just happened recently? The governor's appointees, regents at UNM, decided that there's a big pot of money, apparently, at the UNM Health Sciences Center that would help bail out Medicaid's $50 million deficit. This is what happens when abuse of power is not confronted, is not prosecuted, is not brought to justice. The reasons are many. Now, you mentioned intent, for instance, Kathy. Now, that raises in a lawyer criminal intent. That's part of the element of a crime.
Yes, that's what we're interested in.
Right. So why have we not seen prosecutions under a variety of statutes, federal and state, that would include the Governmental Conduct Act and the Procurement Code? Because I've also spent my entire career in state government doing public contracting and public purchasing. It's one of my areas of expertise. There are criminal and civil penalties in both the Governmental Conduct Act for contract violations and in the Procurement Code. Why has it not happened? I would suggest that the laws are too weak to be able to successfully prosecute. Why are the laws weak? Because if you've ever spent the hours and hours that Senator Ortiz-Espino and his colleagues have spent going through the legislative, when a bill goes through the legislative process, it often looks different when it comes out the other end, right, Senator? And it's not what you wanted, but you're willing to be incremental about this. It's part of the process. You'll take what we can get. Now, a question was asked. So we now see, history sort of repeating itself. People in power in the executive branch who have, quote unquote, gotten away with it so far. They think they can do it again and, quote, get away with it. It takes change. Frankly, it takes taking back the House of Representatives. It takes taking back the fourth floor, the governor's office, for really anything to be resolved here, while the court system works its slow way. Now, let me also say, I am not an attorney of record in any of these cases. I'm retired from the active practice of law, even though I'm still licensed. I don't have inside information. There are a variety of civil lawsuits out there. We also know there's been a request for the federal government to investigate CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, which is one of the main funders of the system now, and under which rules, the federal rules, administrative rules of CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicaid Assistance. I try to be careful with the acronyms here because I know not everybody knows them. And I don't know a lot of them too. That may turn into a criminal investigation if the Inspector General, if that's who actually takes the lead for the federal government, for that Department of Health and Human Services, turns over information to the U.S. Attorney. We may see that. But a question that I think we need to ask of our Attorney General is, are you planning to do a criminal investigation of what happened here? Are you planning to do it? He may say, and I like the Attorney General. I think he's an honest guy. I think he cares. I know I've talked to him personally about this on more than one occasion in my role as a Senate staffer during the session. But he is not committed to this. He did get $1.8 million in the 2015 General Appropriations Act to do these audits that we now have the results from. What is he going to do next year? I would remind respectfully the Attorney General, he's no longer the state auditor. The state auditor investigates and turns over the information to a prosecutor. Could be the Attorney General, could be the District Attorney, could be the U.S. Attorney. I would respectfully ask the Attorney General to be reminded that he could prosecute if he has a reasonable belief that criminal violations have taken place. And what's an example? I'll get to you in a second, Kathy. I'm on a roll. You got it? And I know time is almost up, and there may be some other questions. I'd be glad to stay as long as you'd like me to stay. These so-called emergency procurements for the awards of these contracts to the Arizona companies, in my humble and my opinion, my personal opinion, they are a clear violation of the procurement code. This was an emergency created by administrative decision, not what the definition of an emergency procurement is in the procurement code. Look up, it's 13-1-1, 26 or 27. That's when there's a natural disaster, when there's an unexpected man-made disaster, floods, fires. It's not because I want to reward my political contributors wherever they are, whether they're Arizona, Texas, Colorado, my home state of Maryland, doesn't matter. That's not an emergency, not when it's created by a voluntary decision to take an administrative action. Why has this not been prosecuted? I don't know. Kathy, go ahead.
But is the violation of the procurement code criminal? Is it?
So, her question was, is a violation of the procurement code criminal? And the answer is, and this was just changed in 2013, that yes, there's always been both civil and criminal penalties in the procurement code. And in 2013, the procurement code was amended as part of a variety of other reforms to provide that it's a fourth-degree felony to willingly, with intent, violate the procurement code. Now, that means...
When in 2013?
Huh?
When exactly?
During the 2013 legislative session, it was amended in a bill that was sponsored from the LFC, that Senator Rue and Representative Lucky Varela co-sponsored, and I testified on behalf of that bill. So it is a fourth-degree felony to violate the procurement code, but there is something in the law that you've all heard of called the statute of limitations. Time is ticking here, okay? We can't dawdle around a whole lot longer before someone who is either prosecuted or sued raises a defense of statute of limitations, and it's too late to prosecute. Yeah?
How long is the statute of limitations?
It varies. It varies depending on what it is that is the basis of the lawsuit. Yes?
Is there room for a class action lawsuit for people?
So that's a whole different ball of wax, and it's complicated. I know I've got at least one lawyer here, Representative McQueen. So class actions are, there has to be a large group that has a common grievance, basically. There's a variety of things. It's called standing to bring it, which means you're in the zone of interest. we've been hurt, damaged, but class actions, not surprisingly, because Republicans have been appointing, at least in the U.S. Supreme Court, class action lawsuits have been restricted because the corporations don't like them. You mentioned corporate power, and I totally agree with that. So, yes, theoretically, I don't know exactly what these lawsuits are, the civil lawsuits that the various former providers have brought. I haven't seen their complaints. I have talked to one of their attorneys. But, so, it depends. Go ahead,
But isn't
Kathy.
it true that, having looked at this and having spoken to several attorneys across the country, that you only need 5 people, 5 mentally ill people who have suffered either a suicide, a loss, that were impacted by this decision? It only takes 5. And then they, as long as they're willing to come forward and show that, and we've got an attorney that has, excuse my language, cojones, to come out and really fight on this. It takes 5. That's all it took in the developmental disability lawsuit. And but it takes people that are courageous enough to come forward. We've had people that have committed suicide. We've had people that are dragged in jail because they haven't been able to have their provider to keep them stable. It takes 5 to file that class action lawsuit for the right of the mentally ill in New Mexico to get the services that they need. And if we've got those 5 brave ones, we've got to get them out, we've got to get it out, and we've got to do that. I hate lawsuits, but at the same time, if we don't get out there to do it, things are never going to change. We're going to go from one transition to another to another. We've been through 10 transitions since 2005, transition after transition from one. And see, in the behavioral health, well, you live this, in the behavioral health world in New Mexico. So, I mean, that's what I understand.
So, I'm not a litigation expert. I'm not practicing litigation now, and I've done some. I've never done a class action suit, and I would say in terms of the 5, depends on whether you're in state court or federal court. There are different rules, there's different case law. And I don't want to get into that because I'm not really qualified to comment on that. Kathy, anybody else have questions?
7:30.
Why don't you take the lady here who hasn't asked a question?
The mental health service providers within those 15 agencies, if they are members of their professional association, for example, the American Counseling Association, the National Social Work, we are all bound to ethical standards. Every mental health service provider whose service provision was terminated during this debacle, every one of them was put into a situation where they violated their ethical standards because things like client abandonment. They had no choice. The doors were shut. It's done and over with. How? Obviously, the state is not bound to the same ethical standards. Are there comparable ethical standards to which state providers are held accountable, like do no harm, beneficence and non-malfeasance when the state violates it? Now, in terms of like a class action lawsuit, what potential could the mental health service providers have if they connected with their own professional associations on a national level, who do, by the way, have national advocates, to bring national attention on this? There were thousands of mental health providers who overnight violated their ethical standards. And you all have very dedicatedly and committedly articulated that that was incredibly painful for you. Those standards exist for a reason, because when you abandon your clients, they may end up in jail or dead. So I think that there's the potential for talking about the impact on, the consumer, but also the impact that this had professionally, and our ethical violations are really one angle. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but more a statement.
So that's a complicated question.
Yeah.
I'll simplify it and be general because it really depends on facts. So the ethical and clinical standards are usually for the individual provider to meet or you run the risk of losing your licensure certification, whatever it is that allows you to do that. And if anybody needs to leave, feel free. I certainly don't take it personally. People have walked out on me before, and it's fine.
Those are
But,
the standards.
so, that maybe, and there are rules, administrative rules that are promulgated by Human Services, Health Department,
Yeah.
that to some degree can set clinical standards, but typically those standards are set by the community in terms of if you're looking at malpractice, for instance, and are not in law, meaning rules which are administrative, executive branch made law, or statutes which have to create the basis for administrative rules.
Well, to follow up to that, those are not only national professional ethical standards, but in New Mexico, our licensure laws have standards and rules and statutes. that we are
Absolutely.
bound to. So
That's an individual provider issue.
It is.
Typically, that's not the issue of has the organization been damaged, has a patient or consumer been damaged. That's a different legal standard and burden of proof for whichever plaintiff brings that.
But
So,
interestingly-
I'm sorry, let's, because we can spend all night on that. Yeah, Kathy?
So, I mean, I come from academic psychology, where I did psychology research, and I was responsible for the lab's ethical standards and IRB. I had to train everybody on ethics. I had to
Can you
make sure.
explain what an IRB is?
It's Institutional Research Board. They review your experiment and determine whether or not that is an ethical experiment.
If it's a human
It's
experiment.
a human experiment, actually with animals too. So, and with certain populations, pregnant women, prisoners, the mentally ill, and the elderly, there is an extra level of ethical review. And what I don't understand is why, someone coming from that background, where someone can just change the rules on, for instance, in Las Vegas, they just closed the OBGYN and people now have to drive an hour and a half to Santa Fe to get ultrasound service. There was just an article in the paper that prisoners are basically being neglected. There's, horrible cases of prisoner neglect. The department is supposed to read, I'm just saying.
In the interest of time. So prisoners are a whole different story. We have the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that applies to the states.
Yeah.
It prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. That's a whole different legal standard. IRBs are about experimental research.
But I'm
using
wondering why we
humans.
don't
This is not
identify-
an experimental research. This is a
I understand
government-funded
that, but I wanna-
program
Cliff.
that the services were cut. I don't think it's.
I want to
applies
understand why we as a policy do not identify certain populations as being vulnerable and disallow simply cutting their, what I'm saying is why don't we have an
Because
extra
the
layer of
federal
protection?
rules that apply to IRBs, institutional review boards,
I
are
don't
for
think you're understanding
research.
what I'm asking.
Well,
Can we-
I do understand what you're asking because I know what
I
IRBs
think
are. Okay, and then we'll move on if there are any other questions. You want to respond? This isn't an experimental,
I
human
understand, I'm
experiment
asking
situation.
why we don't, as policy, protect people who meet certain categories so that their services, no matter what they are, can't be just arbitrarily changed or,
So your real question, I think, is are these services an entitlement or are they provided at the discretion,
Yes.
which means it's a choice?
entitlement.
And I wish these services were an entitlement. Medicaid, once you qualify for it, is an entitlement. But not, this is a multi-funded system. And what the health department did, and it's continued with the human services department, is combine, that's why they created the Behavioral Health Collaborative in 2000, what was it, Jerry, fourth generation administration, to combine all of the funding in one place and theoretically improve the system. What they also did, and Jerry had a bill in 2009, you may recall, was create the single entity, Optum Health, to oversee the whole thing rather than the state,
But
which has
that's why,
turned out to be a
you
fiasco.
have to do the lawsuit, because in New Mexico, ICFMR, which is my program,
Wanna
is
explain what that
an
is?
entitlement program, and it came about because of the lawsuits to have,
Right.
so that individuals with those disabilities have that right. I think Lorraine wants to add to it, but
Don't use the mic, sir.
I think I hate to do it, but that's what it's.
Thank you for the comments, and I wanted to comment on something Angel said and then also get specific. I think what Laura was saying is what specific actions can we take? And so, when you were talking about beginning from or continuing a community sense, I mean, we absolutely have to. We know the power of the community and we need to bond, and everybody needs to work together while we're also working the macro, right? We have to come from bottom up and You had said something about 15 corporations. Why are we worried about that? Well, it does constitute 85% of the Medicaid population. And Governor Martinez did specifically say that mentally ill people rarely vote. And so she specifically said that she would target this population because they don't vote. And it's true. It's true. When she looks at the percentages and she breaks this down, she knows who she can target and who she can get political moves from. Now, what I'm specifically concerned about, and this addresses what you were saying, Kathy, is that the second component of this, so first they freeze all the funding on a dime. The second component involves a consumer protection piece from the federal government called the due process, or the good cause exception. So they completely, ignore consumer rights. So the federal government says, well, you can freeze funding, but then if they're the sole provider, or somebody surely testified about this, or, I'm sorry, I've been in an all-day-long administrative hearing with HSD all day today, so I'm irritated. And so they ignored consumer protections. They blatantly ignored a federal consumer protection provision. Am I correct that that's a federal?
So we need to be careful about mixing terms and applicable legal authority. And so, you didn't intend this, but it's a good example of the patients have rights, state and federal, and the providers have rights, state and federal. You may have been in a hearing that was adjudicating the provider's rights. And it may not be that there's indifference to the patient rights. It may not have been the subject that was being decided. I don't know what your hearing was about, so.
No, I'm saying that the due process or the
that's for the
good
providers,
cause exception.
For the providers.
But it's designed to help consumers
Of course.
continue their services.
Sure.
So
and they completely
the
ignore
criteria
this.
for the good cause exception asked, do you serve an underserved population? Do you provide services in an underserved area? Are you the sole provider of particular services in a given area? That's why she's referring to it as consumer protection. Certainly, it was about trying to restore the funding so the organizations could continue to do their work. But the questions that we had to respond to specifically had to do with consumer protection.
Sure, ultimately will benefit.
And they ignored it.
And
And
they
they ignored it.
That's
absolutely ignored it. And
let me make some specific suggestions to go forward, because that was a question, and I don't want to cut you off, but I know time is limited. So there's some things we can do, which is one of the things, and a lot of this, not coincidentally, requires statutory change, which will be very hard to do unless the Democrats take back the House and take back the governor's office, because that's where the bills have to pass. You have a question?
I do. So you seem to know a bit about funding institutions or whatnot. So legally, what would the process be to legally establish, let's say you've got 5 practitioners that have done courtroom stuff. What would they need to do to get the insurance and authorization to receive Medicaid funding on the federal level? And then also, what sort of legal considerations would we need to make in order to form a locally co-opted funding system for our behavioral health?
So the first question about providers, I'm not qualified to answer. So I will leave that to someone who would prefer to
Well,
answer.
first of all, you have to be credentialed through the managed care companies who manage the Medicaid money. And you have to meet certain educational criteria, training criteria in order to get credentialed. So it's not like you can just go and say, I'm going to start this co-op and I want to do all these wonderful things. I want us to be able to bill Medicaid in order to work with the people that are there. If you're not a licensed clinician, if you don't meet the criteria, you won't get credentialed to do that. I mean, that's just the way the system works. And you go through the credentialing process, you go through the NCO. Just like Shannon was telling, as a provider, you have to be credentialed as a provider and demonstrate that you have the appropriate network, if you would, within your provider network that have all of the appropriate criteria in order to be credentialed. So it's a process. And not just anybody can do it.
So a good strategy, Angel, for you, and I have been following your work on Facebook and saw that you got your website up and going. So a good strategy, the way that I believe that you should focus is exactly what you're doing. We're trying to create a resource clearinghouse. So let folks who have the ability to provide a variety of services, whether it's behavioral health or yoga or skills development kind of stuff, whatever it is, have everyone be able to join in. I know that you have a bias against larger organizations, but I will tell you that some of the larger organizations which get public health funding, they are critical pieces. A small, single therapist practice cannot provide some of the need for some of the needs of individuals who have significant need. A small group practice can't do that, even if it's got a half a dozen therapists and a psychiatrist and a psychologist. Some of those services need to go through some of these other organizations. So I would counsel you, don't exclude those other organizations. Let them be part of that clearinghouse too and identify what it is that they do. Be open to anyone who wants to help. But as far as your co-op having the ability to pay individuals for those services, that is a mammoth undertaking. And it's unlikely in any kind of short term, because what you want to be able to do is help alleviate this crisis now. So I think you focus on gathering and sharing resource information that anybody could tap into and contribute to, regardless of their interest, as long as they want to care about it.
Let me answer the original question I was going to answer. And that is a great question. It's a little bit, I wasn't going to address that, but I'm glad you asked. I want to, thank the champions, particularly in the Senate, because that's where I work. And Senator Ortiz-Pino, clearly, Senator Mary Kay Aitken from Las Cruces, incredible leadership. Senator Howie Morales from Silver City, incredible leadership. Bill O'Neill, Senator from Albuquerque, North Valley. Former Senator, now State Auditor Tim Keller, who is very familiar with this. Former Representative, now Senator Neil Stewart, have all, and there's others, Jerry, but Jerry knows, have done courageous work in the face of obstinate opposition from the administration to change the current system or to look back at what's happened or to correct it and move forward. So what can be done? Here's a couple things, and these are all subject to debate. These are just my thoughts. One is return the Behavioral Services Division to the Health Department, so that clinical issues and not financial issues are the primary driver of state policy. Some people don't like the health department, and that's fine. That's a legitimate debate. Reinstitute the regional care coordination system that the Behavioral Health Collaborative replaced, basically, so that the state has direct supervision over regions. 5 regions within the state was what we had in the late 90s before this Behavioral Health Collaborative came in 2003. So that the state again is responsible, which means doing away with the single entity, the Optum Health, which, as Jerry has very eloquently stated, basically drains off profit for money that should be going to clinical services. And Jerry had a bill in 2009 that we worked on together that didn't get very far, but it's still there. There have been efforts to enact legislation to define Medicaid fraud and create due process. Senator Keller, Senator Keller, Senator Papin have all introduced those. And there's I have a whole file of bills that have been introduced, but they don't get very far because the good guys, frankly, don't control the legislative process anymore. And so unless there is significant institutional change, we're going to have what we have. Yes, ma'am, you haven't asked a question.
This has all been great, and I know we have to wrap down, but where do we go from here? It's been a lot of preaching to people who already know a lot of this. I have grave concerns about 3,000 clients, largely kids, and this is eminent. So I'm even thinking of not retiring my license just because of this. So the question is, what are we going to do right now, and where do we continue as a group? Is anybody looking for somebody to keep a garbage going rather than recreating the wheel?
I'm going to yield the microphone because we're way past time, but thank you for listening. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to give it to Jerry here. He had a couple things to say, maybe you can touch on that. And then I'd like to wrap it up here. A couple of people said they were going to stay, so feel free to have some communication afterwards, all right?
you know, we do have separation of governmental powers, so the executive is responsible for making provisions. And I think they're already doing something around finding somebody to take Agave's place. All we can do as the legislature is monitor it, ask them questions, and then during the next session, we have the only authority we really have is the appropriation authority, which gets me to what I think is the underlying problem. We made two huge mistakes in our state. One, we converted almost all of our behavioral health money into Medicaid money. That's great because it matches it. We spend a lot more money than we ever did before, but it's not so good because we now, as Cliff mentioned, have to follow the federal rules, not state rules. The second big mistake we made was by going to managed care for our Medicaid money. And states have backed off on that. At least two states, Connecticut and Oklahoma, now run their own behavioral health program themselves. They haven't turned it over to a private company. We used to do that. There's no reason we couldn't do that anymore. All we've done now is interposed for-profit corporations in between the people who need the services and the social workers and the agents, the client service agents who want to get them the services, and the actual provision of services. What they say repeatedly is, I'm sorry, that's not medically necessary. You can't get that because we don't think it's medically necessary. You can't have those extra treatment days because we don't think it's necessary. We don't think it's, we sitting in a car in a Houston parking lot, we sitting in an office in Los Angeles, we don't think you need that service. This is a nuts approach. Managed care may have a role in primary care. It has no role in behavioral health. So what we need to do is begin talking to the people who are going to be running for governor in 2 years and explain to them tediously, over and over again, every time you have a chance to talk to whoever those candidates are, whoever they are, pull Medicaid, behavioral health out of the managed care system and have the state run it themselves. It's simple. All we would have to do would be to file a waiver request, an amendment of our existing waiver, and we could, what we're spending now is almost $1 billion on behavioral health, and we don't see any results because all that's done is capitated. We're giving it out in little dibs and dabs every month for everybody in Medicaid. The managed care company that says no to your service gets the money that month and the next month and the month after that. They'll get it all year long. We're going to spend that $1 billion whether they provide any service or not because we're giving it to them up front and then saying you manage it and make sure that everybody gets served well, and then we don't even know if they're getting served well. We have no way of knowing if they're getting served well. We're wasting $900+ million of Medicaid money on a system that's not producing what we want it to produce. So it has to be changed. It's not going to be changed by this administration. It might not be changed by the next administration if it's a Democrat who doesn't understand this. Our job now is to make them understand so that when the day they take office, they start appointing people to those key positions who understand and will make this change. That's the only way we're going to get control of our behavioral system back. We've turned it over to for-profit companies, and they may, you know, legally they're probably organized as a nonprofit. Molina and Presbyterian Health, they're legally not, but they still operate the exact, they're trying to maximize their profit. And so we're just giving away state money and not getting anything back. We should be running our own, the way Oklahoma, that bastion of socialism, Oklahoma has done for the last 8 years. They run their own behavioral health system and they run it well. And Connecticut, where all the insurance companies are headquartered, they're running their own. They know that these people have no interest in service. These people are motivated by profit. And as long as you're saying profit is going to be the driving force, then we're screwed. We have no way around it. We're just turning the program over to for-profit companies and say, please do a good job. Please do a good job and make us a little money at it while you're at it. That's never going to work. So my big thing is, let's educate the candidates.
They keep what they don't pay out.
Yeah, they get to keep as profit what they don't pay out in services. And the behavioral health now, because we've integrated it, behavioral health, where people don't scream, that's the subsidy for all the rest of it. It's all integrated. Your behavioral health money is going to pay for primary care, it's going to pay for long-term care, nursing homes, all of that is where the behavioral health money is getting sunk. And then if somebody needs help, they send them to jail. That's where the behavioral health services are being provided, in jail or prison. It's a vast backwards approach.
I see your question there. Just because of time, it's 7:55, so running over. Did you have a question directed to somebody directly?
No.
Go ahead.
What I see happening is that there are two different issues. One is, how are we going to fix the behavioral health system in New Mexico? The other is a more pressing issue, and that is for the clients who are getting services right now from a company who are facing the possibility of losing all or part of their services. We don't have time right now to not deal with that. You know, we the providers, listen to on a daily basis our clients being scared because they're fearing that they're going to lose their services. We have a relational business with our clients. They are facing the possibility because the providers, like everyone else, have to pay mortgages and car payments and insurance payments, and therefore have to look for other jobs.
Yeah. So I'll let some of you guys, anyone here answer
I
that.
want to know, what is your leadership at Agave? That's what I would want to know. I want to know, what are they telling you and how are they?
They're not talking to us.
Okay, that
We
is,
learned from watching the news.
right, oh my God.
We got an email on April 1st telling us that on June 30th, they were pulling out of New Mexico because Medicaid payment to providers was not going to be enough to sustain their business.
So,
And that's that, and there have been lots of rumors, and our clinical supervisors have talked to us about rumors. There is no answers.
go ahead, Shannon.
So, first I will tell you that this past year, Agave Health 990 shows that they made $16 million. Having been a behavioral health provider that started with nothing and grew it to making a number of millions of dollars, I find it hard to believe that someone can make $16 million and not be able to manage adequately to ensure that they have a viable entity if they have management who is interested in providing care and interested in continuing in New Mexico. This is the third Arizona company that's coming and leaving. They also acquired, by the way, all of our fixed assets when they came in. For pennies on the dollar, they got millions of dollars worth of infrastructure. They're taking that with them when they leave, along with Senator Ortiz-Pino talked about $24 million. That was their initial startup money. These companies, many of them, if not all of them, have had as much as 140% Medicaid rates. Okay, if I had 140% of Medicaid rates, we would have been providing services in every community in the state by now. And so, to answer your question, you have to reassure your clients. You have to still continue in relation to them. You have to do what I suggested at the beginning in terms of making sure that as someone's coming in, that you're going to be part of the solution. And you have to also encourage them. I know Patsy talks about care coordination not being able to adequately do anything, but we can have them witness what's going on, and that helps promote accountability. And soon, sometime in the next 2 weeks, we're going to find out who's coming in to take over the Agave Health business in each agency. And so stand firm, because that's what we do, right? We stand firm and try to support those who need it. And
You did it when you transitioned from Team Builders to Agave. You did it, you will get to do it again. Unfortunately, you will have somebody that responds to this RFI and steps in. It might be at the 11th hour, but you'll have an entity that you bond to go through similar transition.
And hopefully, it'll be a New Mexico provider that cares about the communities and the people of New Mexico. That's a critical part of the error that was made when
HSD started their.
There's already advertisement, there's already looking for employees from a company out of California coming in. And their specialty is going to be autism and some ADHD. And so that's already happening. There's companies, corporates that are coming in.
Yeah, and we received some calls from companies in Texas. I will tell you, if we have folks who are coming in looking to make a quick profit, it's not going to help. We need people who care about this state and care about these people to step in and do the work.
Right, so they'll be able to bond to the next provider. I
Yes.
just have one question for you, Jerry, about today. Who do we write the letter to? So on a local level, you've got to bond with the next person that responds to the RFI, hopefully a New Mexico-based person that you guys can move through the transition. Who do we write the letter to that's going to get this, all the work, Senator Papin, all the, and Udall and the congressional delegation, who do we write the letter to pay attention to? Who's the?
I think Patsy had an idea.
Okay, so I strongly recommend that you write your letters to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. You can send it through the congressional delegation or through the state attorney here in New Mexico, and send it to HSD as well and the governor's office, but make sure they know that you are talking the Department of Justice, because that's what we've done. We've been complacent and played the
You
game.
send a model letter out to people,
I
you know what it
yes.
is, the word. Like, most people don't know what to say in this letter, right?
We have everyone's email, we'll send it out.
We can do this.
That would be a good idea. I have to tell you, I don't have any confidence at all in the federal CMS.
Right.
They have been so wishy-washy on, and even the other day when Congressman Lujan Grisham was grilling the guy,
Yeah.
he was like a weasel. It was like there was nothing, no backbone there at all. I had no confidence that he was going to act on what she was pushing him on. But maybe the Department of Justice would be a much more appropriate place to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to CMS either. Yeah, but I think if you do that and get your letters out there, especially as you express your concern, this is the second time we've done that. See, all they hear is that everything is fine. They get letters from HSD and they're serving 80,000 more people and everything is hunky-dory in New Mexico. You really, really need to express yourself and put it there. It's the letters from the constituents that make the difference. We have all sent letters, formal letters, the New Mexico Provider Group. We sent one collectively through our congressional delegation, through the Department of Justice. Senator Papin, Senator Michael Sanchez, Representative Brian Egoff are also, we just submitted a timeline and letting them know what occurred here. They're supporting it. Your voices would be tremendous in backing that up.
You're talking about letters being sent to these people on the health providers level. But what about those of us that
No, I'm talking about the consumer level and the professional clinicians that provide the service for you.
On every level.
Not the agency level, but at your level, because that's, don't you agree? I think that's a stronger voice, and I would do that. And we'll work with you to get a sample letter out or something.
So, yeah, when they think it's coming from providers, they think it's about our business, right? We must be trying to get our money back. When you talk about it, all of you can tell them what it's like to experience it. And I actually was one of the individuals who wrote one of these letters here in the last week. And when I wrote it, it is the first time that I've been asked to tell my story. And yes, I was a provider, but I can tell you that it was one of the most emotional experiences that I've had in my life. If you take the time to write down what you've experienced over the last 3 years, it will have impact. I believe it will have impact, and coming from you all will carry significant weight.
So us as the client, like my daughter is a client.
Yep.
And just over 3 years ago when this whole shakeup happened, it just, I mean, before then she had so many services, and all of a sudden this whole shakeup came and like 90% of her services just vanished.
Right.
You need to hear it.
Write it.
Yes,
You know,
because
and
they're
it's
telling them
just-
that
and
they're providing more
everything that
services.
we have spent years working on, you know, just basically went down the toilet, just like that.
Yes.
Is there anything that we can do at the county level? I mean, so even if it's finding or trying to match clients with new providers, I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do at the county level as a collective, because, you know, these big entities don't seem that interested in what's going on.
So let me mention, and Jerry probably knows more about this, Bernalillo County is attempting to, through a large bond issue, $17 million, I think, and creating
It's a gross receipts tax.
a local structure to address behavioral health issues in Bernalillo County. Now, this is a new development in New Mexico, because up until now, behavioral health has been a state function. And I personally, I saw that, and there were some advantages, certainly at the state level. When I was an attorney for the state, it was easier administratively to administer that. But I think the way to go would be to look at what Bernalillo County is doing and see if we can strengthen here in Santa Fe County and in northern New Mexico.
And Doña Ana County is.
And Doña County. We don't really have, we haven't advanced as far as Bernalillo County has, but maybe you want to talk about that, Jerry, what they're doing.
Well, it's not certain what they're going to do. They're looking at how to spend that, but they would like to spend it in a way that fills in the gaps in the Medicaid program, that provides either services that Medicaid won't pay for, or provides payment to professionals like LADACs or licensed independent LCCCs who Medicaid won't pay, or to people who aren't eligible for Medicaid. They would fill in the gaps that way. And I think that's basically a really good approach. One of the things Medicaid won't pay for is detox. So that would be one of the things I would expect is that they're going to be paying for sure. And to try to expand the overall system by complementing rather than replacing Medicaid dollars. I think as soon as, what's his name, what's his name, the head of
Thanks for coming.
behavioral health?
Oh, which one? Oh, Wayne Lindstrom.
Wayne, as soon as Wayne Lindstrom decides who's going to take Agave's place, the county ought to really meet with that agency immediately and talk about how we can fill in what, because if that agency comes in and they don't provide some of the services that Agave provides, we're going to have the same reputation. And so then we have to figure out how do we fill in those gaps in the overall service structure.
The county in Rio Riva County, just to tell you, the county in Rio Riva has really taken a leadership role in the community to make sure that they are on top of it, and they're really pressuring who's going to take over and making sure that the services for their community are delivered. I would do exactly what Jerry said and start. It's the Health Council at Rio Riva, but they're very aggressive.
In Santa Fe County, we have a brand new health commission. It's less than a month old, and David Koss is the chair of it. So they might be a good way to.
Okay, so I'd like to end there. For y'all who are wondering what can I do immediately, we plan on having another forum really soon. We want to make sure we have your emails, but we want to find solutions, and we at Young Democrats in Santa Fe County, we can definitely have more of a reach to the things they just discussed now, as far as in 2 weeks when they do tell you all who's taking over. How can we make sure that your voice is part of that conversation of who's getting hired and stuff like that? So like I said, please make sure we have your contact info. This is not the end of the conversation. This is just the beginning of the conversation. And thank you all for staying. And like I said, if anyone stays and answer questions, please feel free. So thank you all on the panel. Yes.